Hello and welcome everyone to another Tech Talk. Today we're going to be talking about building location-aware applications, specifically with AWS Amplify and Amazon Location Service. This is a level 300 talk. So in addition to the slides, we're also going to be hopping into a couple of demos and seeing what the code looks like as well. My name is Michael Liendo. I am a self-taught front-end engineer by trade. However, I'm currently working on the developer advocacy team for AWS Amplify. I'm also a former AWS community builder, and I have a background in building both small and large scale applications for startups and enterprises. Nowadays, you can typically find me helping out those same startups and building out production use cases with Amplify and the rest of the AWS ecosystem. So, today we're really going to be focusing on how you can drive forward your ideas without much overhead. And when you combine Amplify, which we'll talk about in just a moment, with the rest of the AWS ecosystem, you can do really interesting things, such as asset tracking, delivery applications, and geo-marketing. So now, once we bring in all of these services, you can set up for example, geofence around a location, and you can have your users respond to those events once they enter or exit said geofence. The same can happen with a delivery service, where now you can track your assets as they travel across the country or the world with the help of Amazon Location Service. Now, our example today is actually going to be on a closer to home scale. We're going to be building out a Park View Cafe, and we're going to be talking about how this is architected with the use of Amplify. Now, in this example, we're going to be dealing with a business use case where you have a coffee shop owner who's wanted to enable online ordering in their application. Now, the thing about coffee is that it can get cold by the time someone arrives to pick up the coffee. So, in this instance, we want it to be ready at a moment's notice. But having everyone show up to the store, even if they've already prepaid their coffee, isn't so much of a unique experience than what is currently offered today. So what we'll set up is a geofence around the coffee store's location. And that way, when they are in a reasonable bounds, we'll send off a notification to the store saying the customer's close. Let's go ahead and build out their order. Now, to get this taken care of, we're going to be using a couple of application actors today. I've touched base on Amplify, and we're also going to be making use case of AWS AppSync. In addition, to bring in that location service, we're going to have Amazon Location Service to do just that. Now, for those of you that may be unfamiliar with AWS Amplify, it's a infrastructure as code-like service geared towards front-end developers. So typically, when you build out your infrastructure as code, you may be used to our other offerings, such as the AWS CDK or AWS SAM. But from a front-end perspective, AWS Amplify really shines for helping out front-end developers build out full-stack applications with ease. Now, AWS Amplify is really geared towards that front-end developer experience, where they want to build out a full-stack application. It does so with the use of a couple of tools inside of this framework. For example, if you want to bring in your existing architecture or reference services that you may have created within Amplify, we have a library package that you can do to do just that. Or if you would rather build out your services, we have a front-end developer-friendly experience with the use of the Amplify CLI. Now, this is really interesting because typically when you're building out your services, for example, a Lambda function, we make it so that within the CLI, you simply say Amplify add function without having to worry about the underlying service calls that you may be making. Now, in addition, we also offer hosted solutions when it comes to putting your application online. And contrary to the CLI, you can build out your services within a graphical user interface with Amplify Studio. Now, as I mentioned, this is an entire framework. So even though we offer these tools individually, they work really well when you bring them all together. Now, today, we're really going to be focusing on the Amplify libraries and the Amplify CLI. And in doing so, let's go ahead and hop into our very first demo where we're going to be building a front-end application with Amplify. Okay, so inside of our terminal, I'm going to paste in a code snippet here. And for this application, we're going to be using Next.js to scaffold out our front-end services. Now, we're going to be calling this Coffee Shop Tech just to mimic the idea that we are creating, in fact, a coffee shop application. I'm going to proceed. From here, we're going to be using React.js in conjunction with Next.js as the framework. Once this is all set, I can clear out my terminal and open up my application in VS Code. All right, so with that application scaffolded, I can go ahead and change into the directory and then open it up in VS Code. Once we have this application opened, we can go ahead and start creating our services using Amplify. Now to do so, I'm going to be importing a couple of different libraries that'll just make our life a little bit easier. The first one is going to be Amplify's component library, in addition to the AWS package. And then since we are going to be incorporating maps inside of our application, we have both the open source Math Libre package and the bindings for Amplify itself. Hitting enter will go ahead and install those. And I can verify that within the package.json. All right, so with the installation complete, I can go ahead and clear out the terminal. And now we can actually start scaffolding out our front-end pages. So I'm going to do so by hopping into underscore app.js. And this is really the central point of our entire application. Now, I'm going to replace the contents of this file with a code snippet. And with this created, we now have essentially an Amplify-driven application. Note a couple of things that are happening here. We have this Amplify provider. Now, this is going to be provided by the Amplify front-end service team. So that way we can wrap our application and make it aware of authenticated users and also give it some default styling. And to bring in those styles and tie it in together, we have this Amplify CSS file. Moving on from here, we can go ahead and tackle the home page of our application and then view it online to see just what it looks like. I'm going to switch over to this index.js file, copy everything, remove it, and then we'll do the same thing and we'll bring in that code snippet. Okay, so with our front end page created here, let's go ahead and take a tour just to see what it looks like. Now, ignoring some of the API calls, we'll get to those in just a moment. What we have here are going to be typical front end components that you might be used to if you've delved into front end with React before. Amplify provides for you buttons, flex components, cards, etc. But what's really neat is at the bottom, we actually have this with authenticator component. Now I'm going to start up the application just so we can see what it looks like without this component. And then we can go ahead and uncomment this to get a glance at what's happening. So export default home is what we'll have. I'm going to comment this out. And now let's run our application with the command npm run dev. Now, before we go ahead and view this online, let's go ahead and create some of the other pages. So that way we can get a full experience and then we'll see what the end result looks like in the browser. So next from here, we want to go ahead and have a page where a customer gets essentially a thank you note once everything gets submitted. So over in our pages, we'll create this new file and we'll call it payment confirmation. For the usual, I'll go ahead and include this snippet so that way we have that set up as well. Now, on this page, we're also going to be including a map just to simulate a customer moving closer and closer to the store. Ignoring the API calls, you can see that the actual components are very simple. We have a custom map component that is taking in that location data, and it's going to be updating every time a button is clicked. So moving forward from here, let's go ahead and create some of the other pages. Now, on the administration side of things, we also want orders to be created as well. So the next thing I think we should do is create this order page. Now, only employees are going to be able to see this route. That's exactly what we want because no one else should have the ability to see these real-time orders. Pasting in our order page, you can note that we're still going to be making API calls to AWS Amplify, But at the end of the day, once we get the received order in real time, we'll go ahead and render it out to the page. So with this custom app component, I'm going to name the directory components, and then the file itself will be map.js. Inside of here, following the same suit, I will paste in the code so that way we have our map available to us. Now, scrolling through, you can see that we're not doing anything too crazy. We're initializing a map using map libre, and then we're going to be placing some markers on the screen. Outside of that file, let's go ahead and verify that on the payment confirmation screen, we in fact are importing the map from the components directory. And as you can see, we have components, map, and what I should do is probably make this a capital just to make sure that it lines up. All right, so quick recap of what we have. We have a home page where a customer can view coffee shop products. We'll see what that looks like in just a moment. Once they submit a product by pressing on the buy button, they'll be directed to a payment confirmation screen. Now from here, we're going to simulate them walking to the coffee shop as we move a marker across the screen. And then on the employee side of things, we're going to have an order page. So that way, when the customer gets near, we can go ahead and see their order pop up once they enter a geofence. Now, this is just the front end. So let's go ahead and add in some Amplify services and connect this to AWS using the Amplify CLI. I'm going to make some space right here. So to kick this off, I'm going to run the command amplify init. This is going to initialize our application and really just perform a binding with our front end to AWS. It's going to ask me for the name of the project. That's perfectly fine. And for the default configuration. We can go ahead and stick with this for now, though keep in mind we are using Next.js, so you may want to configure things like your source directory path, etc. Once that gets done taking place, it's going to ask us to select an AWS profile. I already have a couple set up on my machine, but if not, it'll walk you through creating those so you can get that as well. I have a default profile that I'll go ahead and use, and it'll take us on to the next step of pushing up a bucket to host our application on the cloud. Okay, so with our application deployed to AWS, we can go ahead and clear out the terminal. And that initialization step gives us the ability to add AWS services using the Amplify CLI. Now, I'm going to add our very first service. This is going to be authentication. So that way we can have everyone sign in, but then we'll also configure a few Cognito groups as well. Amplify add auth is going to do just that. Now it's going to ask me a couple of questions to provision my Cognito user pool and Cognito identity groups. I'm going to accept the default configuration, and I'll have my users sign in with an email. I don't want to configure any advanced settings at the moment, so I'm going to say I'm done. However, I will update Cognito by running the command amplify update auth, just so we can add in a couple of Cognito user pool groups. In fact, I'm just going to add one called employee. So that way we have a clear distinction between users who sign in, and then we have users who sign in who work at the coffee shop. Now, notice here that Amplify provides for me a full walkthrough of how I want to configure Cognito. What I'll do is I'll say I want to add in user pool groups, and then give it the group name. We have employee, and I don't want to add any others, but if I did, note that I could shift the preference of which Cognito user pool groups take priority. And just like that, we added in authentication. So I can run amplify push -y, push up all of my resources, and because I've done this 1 or 2 times before, I'm pretty sure with that -y flag that I don't have to have a confirmation step in between. However, it is going to generate a table just so I can get a visual aid of what my application looks like with different services provided. So note that I have one service for authentication. That is my Cognito identity pool. And then I also have the actual groups itself. All right, now that our build is finished, I'm going to clear out the terminal here, and then I can start out my application by running npm run dev. This is going to open it up on localhost 3000. So let's go ahead and view it in the browser just to see what it looks like. So it looks like before deploying, we did have a mix-up in some of our imports. So what I'll do is head over to my underscore app.js, and it looks like I just need to switch this to the source directory just so we can find the correct file. On doing so, it's going to recompile, and now we can see what our application looks like in the browser. Now we're just about ready to run our application in the browser. However, there's one more file which I'm going to include, which is just a default static list of products that we can have. So what I'll do is right down here, I'll create a new file called products.js. Now, this is just to mimic the ability that we already have products created, but you can also do this with Amplify as well. I have a snippet available that I'm going to paste in right here. Note that we have a coffee shop item here, which is a latte, and then we also have an espresso that we can view as well. Now, to get a full sense of what this looks like in our application, let's go ahead and run it with the command npm run dev. This is going to open up on localhost 3000, so let's go ahead and view that in our browser. All right, so looking at this in the browser, you can see that we have our card elements here, which are our fake product items. We have a latte and an espresso. And we do have buttons where a customer can buy them, and then we also have a sign out button as well. Now recall that we commented out the ability to authenticate on our homepage. That was that with authenticator component. So this is what it looks like assuming we are signed in, but let's actually go ahead and sign in. I'm going to head back over to our code. And in our index.js file, we can make some space by clearing out the file system and the terminal. And if we go down to the bottom, we can uncomment this, and we can actually just take this out. When I hit save, note that I already said through the CLI, I want the ability to authenticate with an email and a password. But I'm actually adding in additional attributes as well, name and nickname. So with that in place, when we create an account, let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Back over in my web page. So now that we're back over in the web page, I can click on create account. And notice that with authenticator gave us the full ability to sign in, create accounts, forgot password flows, etc. And it actually also integrates with your password managers. So I can type in an email here, give it a password, confirm it, and provide my name and nickname as well. Once done, I can select create account, and I automatically get an email sent to me that I can verify with a code. All right, so I just received that code. It is 457760. So I'll go ahead and type that in. And once I confirm, note that I'm routed back to my application. All right, so with our application authenticated and with our components, or products rather, revealed, note that we also have a working sign out button right here. So with that in place, we're actually done with the first part of our project, which is creating an authentication system with separated users, signed in users, and employees. And we have a full sign in and create account flow. So let's hop back into the slides and see what the rest of the application is going to have in store for us. Now, with any application worth its salt, having authentication in place is a really great experience. However, it's not the full story. We want to have, in addition to AWS Amplify and location service as our actor, we're really going to be focusing on our AppSync. Now, AWS AppSync is a managed GraphQL API. It has a ton of benefits with it, such as being schema-first API design. Now, what that means is you can define your schema, and that is your source of truth in your application. On the right-hand side, you can see these app model and app auth directives. Now, those give you enhanced functionality, such as automatically creating a DynamoDB database with app model and having advanced authorization tasks, such as only signed in users can read, in this case, products, and anyone in the Cognito user pool group employee has full access to full CRUD operations. Now, in addition to that, we have WebSocket support as well. And when you combine AppSync with Amplify, you get a lot of enhanced functionality because this really is purpose-built for front-end developers. So with that in place, let's go ahead and see what it looks like to create an AppSync API, right inside of our application by continuing on with our coffee store. Now, creating an API with AppSync is actually a very straightforward step when you are in the context of an Amplify project. To showcase that, I'm going to run the command amplify add API. And the nice thing is that Amplify actually generates two types of APIs depending on your use case. We have the choice between GraphQL and REST. I'll select REST, and from this next step, we actually have a couple of options to choose from. We can specify a name. Coffee Shop Tech works just fine for our use case, but the authorization modes are what we're going to be taking advantage of. You get an API key by default, and that's really used for your development applications. But for our use case, we have a cognito pool already in place, so I'm going to select that. In addition, I can tack on other auth types as well. So I'll select yes from here. And we also want the ability for an IAM user, in this case, a Lambda function, to be able to call our API as well. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. But for now, I'll select this as an authorization type. Now with that in place, I'm going to select continue. And it's giving me the option to select from a generated template. Now we have one already available to us, so a single object works just fine. And I will prompt to open this now in VS Code. Now with that in place, I can close out the terminal and I'll paste in the schema that we're going to be working with. Going through here, we can see that we do have a type of product. And as mentioned, even though we're using static products, we can absolutely generate these on the fly. Next up, we also have an order, and this is a key part of our application. Breaking this down, we have certain rules that will be applied to our schema, such as signed in users have the ability to create orders. And if you're in an employee group, you can also read them, and that gives us real-time functionality as well. But recall that we also have the ability for IAM users, in this case, a Lambda function, to be able to call our API. And in doing so, we have this allow private, and then we specify the provider, which is IAM, and we give it the ability to update. Now, in terms of AppSync itself, specifying an ID with an exclamation mark will automatically have an ID generated for me. Additionally, we can relate that even though we have products defined as a table, listing them out in an array of strings is more beneficial to our use case. Enums in the world of GraphQL are also well supported within AppSync, and we'll also be adding on the customer name as well, which was the important aspect of having a user sign up and provide to us their first name as well as a nickname. Now, this last part is one of the cooler benefits of AppSync. And what's happening here is that we can specify additional mutations and queries for our application. What this means is I can generate a custom query, and this is going to be send location. Now, this is going to act as an API route that takes in a location input and returns back to us a string. What's interesting here is that this isn't going to be automatically generated by AppSync. In fact, I'm specifying go ahead and take in this input and send it over to a Lambda function that we haven't created just yet. But when we do, we'll be sure to call it send location func. That way it gets in all the correct input location data from our application. So what we do at this point is we'll go ahead and save the application, but we did specify that we're going to be creating this Lambda function called send location func. So what I'll do is I'll open up my terminal. And with my terminal open, we'll go ahead and create that Lambda function with a simple command known as amplify add function. This will walk us through a similar series of steps geared towards creating a Lambda function behind the scenes. Now we have the ability of creating layers and functions. We'll select a function here, and we called ours send location func. Hitting enter from here, we can select the runtime that we want to have. I'm going to select Node.js. And then we have a hello world function, but note that we also have other templates that we could take advantage of as well. Hello world is what we're going to be using for our application. And note that we do have the option to configure advanced settings here. Now, for this function, we don't want to configure resource access permissions. We'll do that for another one later on in the demo. So I'll go ahead and select no from here. And then at this point, it's asking me if I want to edit the local Lambda function now. I'll select yes and open this up in VS Code. Now from here, I can close out my terminal and following the same suit as we've done a couple times now, I'll paste in a snippet of code. Our snippet of code will look just like this. And breaking this down, you can see that we're importing the AWS SDK as well as pulling off the AWS location module here. Now, the key point is that this function is going to be in charge of taking in a couple of attributes that we specified on our AppSync schema. This is going to be on the event.arguments.input parameter. We can take those parameters and we can end up calling batch update device location. That way, every time a user moves on a map, we send that location data off to Amazon Location Service, which we'll talk about in just a moment here. Aside from that, we do go ahead and send back a string. And that's really all we have going on in this Lambda function. So I'm going to click save here, but note we are calling an AWS function here. So we have to make sure that we give our Lambda the correct permissions to do so. Now, within Amplify, it does give us the ability to add in inline policies right from within our code. So we have a custom policies.json file, and repeating the same mantra as before, I'll paste in a quick snippet here. So that way we have the ability to call our Amazon location service. Now this is going to be a tracker. And trackers essentially are what allow you to send location updates to the location service team. Now ours is called Coffee Shop Device Tracker, and we'll make sure that we name our tracker appropriately as we open this up in our location section of the demo. So clicking save here, I can hop back into our schema because one thing I want to point out is that we do have that IAM ability. And we're saying we're going to have a Lambda function ended up being called by EventBridge, which is going to be in charge of calling AppSync. Now, doing this is certainly an advanced functionality of AppSync, but I want to go ahead and showcase just how easy it can be done when you use the Amplify CLI. So opening up our terminal, we'll go ahead and add one more function here. And I'll say Amplify add function. Recall that before we didn't have the ability or didn't prefer the ability to add in access resource permissions. But in this case, we would definitely want to allow that. So we have our Lambda function, and we'll go ahead and call this coffee from EB being EventBridge. Node.js is going to be the runtime, and we'll be sure to use this Hello World template as well. Now, in terms of advanced settings, I'm going to select yes. And we do want to go ahead and access another resource already in our application. It's going to be our API. And the whole point of this is that we have a mutation that is going to take place. I'll go ahead and select that. We want to go ahead and make sure that mutation has the ability to update our AppSync API. And in doing so, Amplify is going to give us the correct environment variables that we can use within our application. So we don't want to invoke this on a recurrent schedule. I'll select no. And we don't want to enable Lambda layers. In addition, we can go ahead and bypass the rest of the default configurations in advanced settings. Now we're prompted to edit the local Lambda function now. I'll go ahead and select yes and open this up in VS Code, the editor that I'm in. As you may expect, I'm going to add in a code snippet, making sure that I don't overwrite these because these are actual process environment variables that I need to reference inside of my application. So with that snippet in place, I can go ahead and paste that in here and note that really what we're doing is going to be signing our request. So that way we can call our GraphQL API. Scrolling to the top, we are using some native Node.js modules, including HTTPS, a way to parse the URL, and then we also have AWS specific modules, specifically HTTP request to tie in our correct signer. Now we can view that right down here where we have our signed URL. The first time that this gets invoked is going to be when we have to query for a specific order. The next time that this gets invoked is going to be when we actually update the order from process to needs fulfilled. And what we'll do on the front end is say every time an order switches from process to needs fulfilled, we'll go ahead and make another API call and subscribe the user to view that in the browser. So with our API in place, let's go ahead and Note that we're referencing a certain variable here. This is called fetch order variables. And we haven't actually brought this into our application. Fetch order and update order, in fact, are coming from a file called query.js. Now, this is going to hold our mutations and our query to be able to call AppSync. So what I'll do is I'll create a new file, call that query.js, and then we'll go ahead and paste in the result that we'll need. And I'll show you how we generate this once we push up our application. So pasting this in, you can see that really what we're referencing here are just native GraphQL strings. So we have the ability to update our order, and then we also are calling in the get order attribute as well. So saving this, now I can go ahead and push our API up to AWS, and we can move on to the next section of our application. So I'll click enter here, and then run Amplify push. Note that we have a couple of items that we did add. We have a function, in fact, two of them. And then additionally, we have an API. So Amplify should be generating that we have three items that need to be updated. So just to verify, here is our API. And then in addition, we also have those two functions there. Now, one of the nice things is that Amplify will actually validate our schema just to make sure that we do have the correct typings involved and that we don't have any errors once it is living in AWS. All right, so with our API fully developed and deployed to AWS, let's go ahead and take a look at what just got generated for us. I'm going to open up our File Explorer, and we have a new directory called GraphQL. Now, over in my source folder, we can open up GraphQL, and we can take a look that it actually created quite a bit for us. In fact, we have the ability to now query our API via its products, list them out, as well as individually grab an order as well. Now, we also have the ability to mutate them, meaning full CRUD operations are available. Create, update, and delete. And you may have noticed at the top, we also have this send location mutation. And this is what's going to be calling our Lambda function that we created just a little bit ago. Now, the really nice thing is that we also have subscriptions available to us. We'll take a look at those in just a moment. But these are web sockets that open up, and they listen for any changes on our products and orders. And with that out of the way, now we have our authentication in place, we have our API, and let's go ahead and tie everything together with our Amazon location service. I'm going to switch back over to the slides just to give a bit of an idea of what that looks like. Now we're on the last stage of our application actors. Now, Amazon Location Service is a managed location provider. It integrates very well with existing known industry leaders such as Esri in here to provide maps inside of our application. In addition, it has a focus on security, meaning the data and the locations that you create stay within your AWS account. We don't send them off to any third-party providers. Now, the really nice thing about having a location service is that it integrates seamlessly within our existing ecosystem. So locations can be evaluated and sent to Amazon EventBridge. In addition from that, it ties in very well with Amplify, with custom commands like Amplify add geo, and added in CDK functionality with Amplify add custom, which we'll take a look at just a moment. Now, I mentioned it ties in with Amazon EventBridge. What I also want to emphasize is that EventBridge takes in what's known as a pattern, and the location service will automatically send an AWS.geo source, as well as a detail type and event on over to EventBridge. We can take a look at those to say anytime a user enters a particular geofence, go ahead and send that information off to EventBridge. So the full ecosystem in an application typically looks like this, where we have our maps, we have trackers, which send location updates, we have a geofence collection. We'll tie a tracker and a geofence together with what is known as a tracker consumer. Now, anytime a user enters in a location update, that location will automatically be evaluated against the geofence thanks to that consumer. And assuming that a user has entered a particular geofence, well, an event rule, as we just saw, gets evaluated. And if a user is entered in there, that gets sent over to our event bus, which is the default event bus in your account. So the last part in our application is just going to be adding in these real-time location updates. So let's go ahead and take a look at the implementation of that inside of our application. So the first thing that we'll do is add a map inside of our application. Now we have the code already in place, but we actually never created that within Amplify. So I'll say Amplify add geo to go ahead and get that started. Now I have the choice in my application to add location search or map. I'll select map in our use case, and I'll use the default generated name. Now I want authorized users only to take advantage of this, but if you had a public map, note that we do support that as well. In terms of advanced settings, I'll select yes, and I actually prefer the navigation style map compared to the streets map myself. And with that in place, we went ahead and added a map for our application. Now, we were also talking about trackers and consumers, geofences, etc. Instead of going into the console to create them, or with the AWS CLI, Amplify now supports the ability to add those directly with CloudFormation templates or with the CDK. So what I'll do to go ahead and get those started is I'll run Amplify add custom. Now it'll prompt me to either use the CDK or use CloudFormation. And I'm going to select CDK. In terms of the name of our resource, the default name is perfectly fine, and it will go ahead and create the necessary files and configurations on my behalf with the CDK correctly configured with my Amplify project. So I'm going to open up our Explorer here. In fact, in just a moment, we can actually get rid of the terminal altogether once I specify that I do want to go ahead and edit the CDK stack now. So from here, it will show a full CDK project, even though I'm still within the context of Amplify. Now, when you combine the two together, you can actually have your resources talk to one another. But note that we also provide default settings and constructs in case this is your first time working with the CDK. Per usual, I'll go ahead and replace the content inside of this file with some of the snippets that we've been using throughout. So with that snippet in place, we can go ahead and save our file. And note that I did install a couple of packages just to make sure that we have the correct uses in our Amplify CDK project. Specifically, I brought in location, since we're working with the location service, events, targets, and then we want to integrate Lambda with an existing Lambda that we created earlier. Scrolling down, note the resources that I'm creating here. I have a tracker, a geofence collection, a consumer, rule, and then whenever an event does get triggered and sent off to EventBridge, we wanted to fire a Lambda function, specifically the Lambda that is going to be talking to AppSync. Now, to tie in an Amplify Lambda with one with the CDK, we simply reference it using the Amplify helpers library that we automatically provide. From there, we reference the ARN inside of the application, and then we tie the two together as an EventBridge rule. And with that in place, we're actually all set to test out our application once we push up the resources to AWS. So for the last time in our terminal, I will go ahead and run amplify push, pass in the Y command to automatically accept them. And then once this is all done building, we can go ahead and view it inside of our application. And just like that, with our full stack application pushed up to AWS, let's go ahead and verify some of the connections are actually made within the AWS console. So what I'll do is I'll head over to my browser and take a view at the AWS console itself. Okay, so over in the console, if I view some of the location service types available to us, note that I have maps, which if I click on that, you can see that I do have a default map that was in fact set up for us. And I know that because the ID matches what I specified within the Amplify CLI. In addition, we also have our coffee tracker, which has the appropriate name that we specified in the CDK. Next up, we have our geofence collection, and we have our coffee shop geofence. Now, one of the integration points that I want to make sure that are in place are in fact when a user enters a geofence, that an event is triggered. But we actually haven't set up a geofence just yet. So what I'll do is I'm going to import a geofence inside of our application. So what I'll do is I will click on our geofence collection, and then select the Add Geofence. Now, this could be done with a file or by heading to a site like geojson.io to create the geofence that way. I already have a file, so I'm going to import that right within our app and select Add Geofences. So with that geofence added, once a user enters those bounds, we want to trigger an event bridge rule, so that way our Lambda function gets triggered. Now, to ensure that that integration is in fact set up, we're going to head over to Event Bridge and view the default bus that gets assigned. So I'm going to select on Event Buses. Clicking on that will let us manage some of the permissions on the default event bus, but we also want to view the rules that we created in our application, in which case we have the copy shop tech rule that we created. There's a specified rule that we have set up, and then we also have the copy from EventBridge function that we ended up creating as well. The last thing to do is just to verify that this is all working inside of our application by running it in the browser. So back over in our code, I went ahead and I uncommented the relevant bits that we went ahead and pasted in. And I'm simply going to run our application in the browser. In doing so, we'll open up localhost 3000 one more time just to view what the actual application looks like. All right, and so with our order pages popped up, let's go ahead and simulate a user on the left-hand side purchasing a cup of coffee, and then once they enter the geofence, that should display on the right-hand side for the employers to go ahead and start making that cup of coffee. So here we have our user, they just placed their order, and as we navigate across this map, we'll see that once we enter this park area, the order should pop up, giving the heads up that they can go ahead and start their nice cup of coffee. There we go. All right, so with that done and said, and having those real-time orders submitted, I do want to go ahead and just recap and give you some tips and tricks if you were to go ahead and build this out on your own. Now, as we saw, Amplify definitely increases the time to market. In fact, an entire storefront application was just set up in the time of this video. And AppSync eases API development by providing a schema-first approach. When those two are combined with location service, we can do some really interesting things, such as having geofences automatically evaluated. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed is that we had a -env applied to our Lambda functions, and that's because Amplify supports multiple environments as you shift from dev to prod and have anything in between. In addition, we also use the primitive components within Amplify to quickly scaffold out our application and have a great looking UI. The last part is that we now support the ability to extend your application with CloudFormation or CDK being involved in the development process. And tying that all together with some of the AppSync and Lambda resolvers really allows you to unlock the full capability of AWS. In case you're wanting to enjoy some resources, here are some QR codes that you can feel free to go ahead and scan to our docs on the relevant sites that we talked about today. I want to go ahead and thank you for your time. My name is Michael Leendo, and thanks again for listening to this Tech Talk. Look forward to your reviews.